every organization has an emotional structure, whether it's recognized or not. Beneath reporting line strategies and operational systems, there sits a continuous exchange of emotional signals that shape how people think, how they behave, and relate to one another. This layer is rarely formalized, yet it's one of the most powerful determinants of performance, culture, and long-term sustainability. At the center of this emotional architecture is leadership, not simply in terms of decisions or direction, but in terms of presence. Senior leaders set more than priorities, they set a tone, and that tone doesn't remain localized. Through the mechanisms of emotional contagion, it spreads often subtly and without awareness across teams, departments, and entire organizations. At the same time, modern leadership increasingly carries a hidden burden: disconnection. Senior leaders are often structurally isolated, psychologically guarded, and relationally distant. This connection is not benign and it's not contained. It becomes encoded in the organization itself. Now, to understand the full impact of this, we need to examine not only emotional contagion as a psychological process, but also the biological mechanisms through which humans detect, respond to, and ultimately feed off one another's loneliness. When it's viewed through this lens, organizational culture becomes less about abstract values and more about a network of interacting nervous systems, each influencing the other in real time. So emotional contagion is the process by which individuals unconsciously absorb and mirror the emotional state of others. It operates through microsignals, such as facial expressions, tone, timing, posture, and attention. And these signals are rarely noticed explicitly, yet they're continuously processed. Over time, people begin to align emotionally. A shared affective tone emerges, shaping how the group experiences work itself. This is not simply about mood, it influences cognitive processes, risk perception, openness to collaboration, and the willingness to engage. In organizational settings, emotional contagion is not evenly distributed, it's asymmetrical. Those in positions of authority exert a disproportionate influence. Their emotional state carries weight because it's interpreted as meaningful. It signals what is safe, what is expected, and what is normal. This means that leadership emotion is not a private matter, it's a structural input. Despite their influence, senior leaders often operate under conditions that foster disconnection. There's research that suggests that as many as 97% of leaders report experiencing loneliness at some point, with over 60% reporting it within their current role. And that's not incidental, it's a function of how leadership roles are designed. Senior positions often involve reduced peer interaction, heightened scrutiny, and a perceived need to regulate or conceal emotional experience. Leaders may feel unable to express uncertainty, vulnerability, or doubt, and over time this creates distance, not only from others, but from authentic relational engagement. This disconnection is rarely visible in explicit terms. It doesn't necessarily present as overt withdrawal. Instead, it appears as subtle shifts in behaviour. Communication becomes more transactional. Actions become shorter, more functional, less relational. Informal contact diminishes and emotional expressiveness narrows. Now, these changes may appear minor in isolation, but through emotional contagion, they are amplified. To understand why leadership disconnection spreads so effectively, it's necessary to move beyond psychology into biology. Because as humans, we're not passive observers of one another. We are biologically attuned to social signals. Our nervous systems continuously scan the environment for cues of safety, belonging, and threat. And when we encounter another person, particularly someone in authority, we don't just simply process their words, we process their state. If a leader is present, engaged, and regulated, this is detected as safety. It allows us to relax, to think more clearly, and to engage more openly. But if a leader's distant, emotionally flat, or disconnected, then that signal's different. It introduces ambiguity. And ambiguity at a biological level is often interpreted as a potential threat. Now, this process, described in part by the concept of neuroception, operates below conscious awareness. It triggers physiological responses before cognitive interpretation occurs. Subtle increases in vigilance, slight reductions in openness, and micro adjustments in behaviour begin to take place. The critical point is that these responses are not chosen, they're automatic. When an individual is experiencing loneliness, their internal state is reflected externally. This may manifest as reduced eye contact, changes in vocal tone, slower responsiveness, or a general flattening of affect. These signals are not dramatic, but they are sufficient to alter how others respond. At a biological level, interacting with a disconnected individual can feel less rewarding, less predictable, and as a result, others may unconsciously reduce their level of engagement. They may shorten interactions, avoid deeper conversations, or shift towards more functional communication. This creates a feedback loop. The original individual already experiencing disconnection receives less relational input. Their sense of isolation increases and their behaviour becomes more withdrawn. And others, they respond further in kind. In leadership contexts, this loop becomes system-wide. Because leaders interact with so many individuals, their state is multiplied across interactions. Each interaction subtly reinforces the same pattern. And over time, this produces a collective shift. The organisation begins to feel different. Energy levels decrease, interactions become narrower, and emotional expression reduces. The culture moves towards disconnection without any explicit decision being made. Loneliness is not simply a psychological experience, it is a physiological condition. Research shows consistently that chronic loneliness is associated with elevated cortisol levels, increased activation in the sympathetic nervous system, and reduced capacity for recovery. Now, this has immediate behavioural consequences. Individuals in a heightened stress state are more reactive, less patient, and less able to engage in complex social interactions. Their communication becomes more abrupt. Their tolerance for ambiguity decreases, and their capacity for empathy is reduced. And when this state exists in leadership, it becomes contagious. Stress spreads through tone, timing, and behaviour. Meetings become more pressured, conversations become more transactional, and psychological safety decreases. Now, importantly, this doesn't require overt stress expressions. Even well-regulated, high-functioning leaders can transmit low-level stress signals that influence group dynamics. The combined effect of emotional contagion and disconnection is a gradual but significant erosion of organisational functioning. Engagement declines first. Employees may continue to perform tasks, but their emotional investment decreases. Work becomes something to complete rather than something to contribute to. Then collaboration follows. As relational connection weakens, trust diminishes, communication becomes more guarded, information sharing decreases, and teams become less cohesive, even if formal structures remain intact. Cognitive performance is also affected. Loneliness and stress impair executive function, reducing creativity, problem-solving capacity, and decision-making quality. And at a group level, this leads to more conservative thinking and reduced innovation. These changes are often subtle and cumulative. They don't appear as immediate failure, but as gradual underperformance. The financial implications of workplace loneliness and disconnection are substantial. In the UK alone, loneliness is estimated to cost employers approximately £2.5 billion per year. Turnover represents the largest component, with an estimated £1.62 billion being attributed to employees leaving due to lack of connection. Reduced productivity accounts for approximately £665 million, reflecting the lack of disengagement and presenteeism. On an individual level, severe loneliness has been estimated to cost each individual around about £9,900 per year when considering healthcare, productivity and wellbeing impacts. The health impact of loneliness is comparable to major risk factors such as smoking and obesity. Chronic loneliness is associated with increased risks of cardiovascular disease, weakened immune function and higher rates of depression and anxiety. Perhaps the most significant impact of leadership-driven emotional contagion is culture. As disconnection spreads, it becomes normalised. Employees adapt to the prevailing emotional climate. They adjust their behaviour accordingly. A culture of disconnection is characterised not by overt dysfunction, but by absence. Absence of energy, absence of openness, absence of relational depth. Work continues, but without vitality. This kind of culture is difficult to detect from within. It feels normal to those inside it, yet it's often immediately apparent to those entering from outside. Because leaders influence many individuals simultaneously, their emotional state has a multiplier effect. A single leader's disconnection can influence multiple teams, each of which then influences others. This creates a cascading dynamic. What began as an individual experience becomes a collective condition. Conversely, the same mechanism can operate in reverse. Leaders who are present, engaged, and relationally attuned can stabilize and elevate the emotional climate. Conversely, the same mechanism can operate in reverse. Leaders who are present, engaged, and relationally attuned can stabilize and elevate the emotional climate. Positive emotional contagion can spread just as effectively as negative. The tendency to treat loneliness as an individual issue is insufficient. The evidence suggests that it is a systematic phenomenon emerging from the interaction between biology, behavior, and organizational design. Addressing it requires a shift in perspective. Leaders must be understood not only in terms of strategy and execution, but in terms of emotional and relational impact. This doesn't imply that leaders must perform constant positivity or emotional openness. Organizations are not only systems of processes and objectives, they are systems of human beings, each with a nervous system that responds to and influences others. Emotional contagion ensures that no state remains isolated. Disconnection ensures that certain states are more likely to spread. When loneliness and disconnection exist at the top, they don't stay there. They move through the organisation, shaping behaviour, culture and performance. Cost is measurable in financial terms, visible in health outcomes and tangible in everyday experiences. The central insight is simple but profound. What leaders feel is not contained. What they transmit becomes culture. And what becomes culture determines everything else that follows.